Online for Authors. I'm chatting with Mark Steven Porro, author of A Cup of Tea on the Commode. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, it's nice to be here. Nice to be back in the States.
Yes, it's very nice to have you. Before I loved the book, I found it extremely refreshing. There's a lot of reasons. We'll get into those as we talk. But before we really dive in, why don't you give listeners just a quick idea of what they're going to find when they open up the cover of this book, A Cup of Tea on the Commode?
Okay, well, at 55, I gave up my carefree bachelor life to become a first-time parent to a 90-year-old, sharp-tongued, guilt-tripping, stubborn as all get out, yet funny lady who could barely remember my name, my mother. It's rare for a son to jump in and jump into 24/7 caregiving, but I did it with gusto, and my goal was to fill my mother's last years with love, laughter, and joy. Not always successful, but I came pretty damn close.
Yeah, like I said, it was a great book, but I want you to start with the title. Okay, so where did the title come from? It's a fabulous title. It definitely catches the attention. People are like, oh, wait, what is this, right? But why the title? Let's talk about that.
Well, I had another one in mind, and through the writing process, it just kind of popped up because at this situation with my mother, we had to set a commode bedside to make everything easier for her. And sometimes Mother Nature took a little longer than was comfortable for either one of us. So kind of as a joke, I asked Mom if she'd like a cup of her favorite beverage, which was hot tea, skim milk, no sugar. And she said, sure. And it became a hit. And so that was part of our morning ritual, a cup of tea on the commode. So that once that, writing and I said, you know what, that is pretty catchy. So let me run it by some people, and everybody seemed to agree. And so there we go.
What I love about that is I think that it really encapsulates what it means to be a caregiver for someone, which is you're just constantly looking for a way to make a situation that may not be easier. Or something that just doesn't feel good to feel a little better than it is. And we're always looking for those things. And for you, this happened to be a cup of tea while she was, using the bedside commode. Yeah. And it became something that was almost a joke between the two of you. I mean, it was not even a joke, but like a ritual. It was something that you just did, and you knew that this was going to help this little process go smoother.
A lot of practicality comes through if you. I think you open your mind and your heart to it. So my goal was, and I got my mom's permission before I took over 24/7 care, and my goal was to make her laugh at least once a day. And I said, if I take this on, the first conversation went like this. I said, if you want me to take this on, first of all, we're going to have fun. Second of all, do you understand that I will do everything in my power to keep you healthy and safe? And she said, yes. And I said, well, that means I'm in charge. And her mood completely changed.
Yes.
And I said, that means you must now obey me. And she paused, and then she puckered up for a kiss. She was like, I called her a kissing bandit. She loved kissing. But I wasn't sure if that was a sign of surrender or one wishing me luck. Yeah. And so I gave her a kiss and hoped for the best. And
I was going to say it may have been a little of both.
Yeah, she could be a tough cookie. She had what I called a very accurate BS detector. And if that went off, it was a real tough time for any, especially strangers or other people, to get back in her good graces. So I kind of knew how to deal with that. And but humor played a big role. She was a very funny lady. My dad was pretty funny, and luckily they passed that down to their 6 kids. And so, it came through, and she did some funny stuff. I mean, throughout, and we'll get to those, but yeah.
So one of the things I think I loved the most when reading it, and just to make sure, most people do know that are listening to the podcast, but I've been a caregiver. I was a caregiver for my husband. And I thought your honesty was so refreshing, because being a caregiver is not easy. And there are days and times and things that are not pretty. It's just not. And you didn't gloss over that or shove it under a rug and pretend it didn't existed. You seemed very honest with the fact that there were times that you weren't your best self.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you didn't seem ashamed of it and like you needed to hide it. It's just a fact that we can't
yeah.
all be our best selves every day, and that caregiving is hard, and sometimes we're going to mess it up.
We're human. So the main thing, and some of my siblings weren't very happy of some of the revelations that they didn't know about. But yeah, it was important for me to be honest about everything. And so I was very gentle with the Tweedles, though my brother who hired them does not think so. He still defends them, but and they were renamed for legal reasons. But it's a hard thing. The thing that helped me, well, especially since I wasn't never married and I had no children, I had people say I had a commitment issue. So I did not. But I learned about unconditional love, and you learn that very quickly when you have your loved one's life basically in your hands. And I knew she trusted me, and I knew my siblings trusted me. And that was very important because I've heard a lot of horror stories about the brothers and sisters and everybody fighting for control or whatever. We had none of that.
That's excellent.
I think being the tallest in the family may have helped.
You think that's what it was?
I'm the fifth out of six, but they were great. So they pretty much yielded. And if I needed support, they would be there. And for the most part, I tried to relieve them of any of those, I guess, responsibilities and just come visit mom, have a good time. And
right. Right. So you brought up Tweedles. For those people who haven't read the book, these were some paid caregivers that turned out not to be as caring as they needed to be.
Well, they weren't hired as hands-on caregivers originally because before this incident, they were just there to keep company and take care of household duties, do some shopping and laundry and stuff like that. Mom could still walk and function, but as her needs grew, there was a lot of tension in the house, and again, I want to be careful, but they both parties hid it very well. My mother, I knew, I could tell when I came to visit, because at the time I was living in Los Angeles. So when I would visit, I would see problems and the tension. But the issue was, those who lived away would come in, see the problems, mention it to my brother, who was the point man, and then we would fly back out. And he, so he was kind of stuck. And this was the third group that we hired to live with our mother. And so it's not easy to hire. I have a chapter in the book where I tried to hire a 24/7 caregiver before I decided to take over. And it's miserable. And even in my design business, when I had to hire people, it's a challenging prospect. So
it is. Any good tips in all that you've been through for other people who may be in this position for finding the right caregiver? Well, I know your tip was go do it yourself, right?
Yeah. Yes. But then when I had an issue, I had a health issue, a year and a half or 2 years going into this. And we were blessed with this care worker, Marina. She was from El Salvador, and she was a caregiver for one of my brother's clients. And that client recently passed. So she had an opening right around the time where I almost died. So it was, the timing was perfect. And I'm not, maybe Marina had something to do with that. I'm not sure, but
maybe you never know.
She was a blessing and rare, because when we did these interviews, it's tough. If you can have a family member do it where everybody trusts and is capable of doing this. I'd say not everybody is ready for this, prepared. Certainly the preparations is another thing, but be willing to take this on is a tough task. So if you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. Find somebody who is comfortable, because I didn't want my mother to sense any problem or any tension or any major concern on my part, because then she would feel like she was a burden. Right. And she would feel guilty for being put in that, or putting her son in that position. So anytime I went through, let's say, doubts or frustrations, I try to my best to keep it out of the room. So that's a tough one. I would say the biggest tip that I learned, and I was a designer for many years, and that's where my education is. And then I was an actor for many years in Hollywood, and those all kind of came in to play. And I would say empathy was the most important thing to embrace, because in my situation, she's still my mother. She deserves respect and dignity and to be treated well. And but she's slower. She may not. At one point, she couldn't remember who I was, and they're not going to move as fast, and they're not going to be as sharp. And we have to really put ourselves in their shoes and slow down. And luckily, actually about 16 years earlier, I took my dad to Italy when he was not healthy. I didn't know how bad, because I lived in LA and the family likes to keep things quiet. So I took him to Italy to visit the little village of his father. And my dad was 80 years old and had heart disease. But he was a trooper and he wanted to go. And so we went there, and we spent 16 days in Italy. And that was the first time I had to embrace the role of having this man's life in my hands. And we had to take it easy. And I told him, don't, because he kept apologizing for slowing us up. And the next book that I'm writing is going to be focused more on my dad. And I said, listen, this is your trip. We're going at your pace. Yeah. And we'll see more things. And it was great. So once we slowed down, he stopped apologizing, and we did see more things. Unfortunately, a lot of those were buses leaving without us and stuff like that. But again, if you have a good sense of humor, he certainly did. And I tried to embrace that. And that makes it so much easier.
Yeah, it's definitely hard when the person that you love, you see them slowing down, unable to do what they used to do. You have to really change your expectations. And then it's really hard for them as well. Yeah. I don't know with your mom, because she had some memory issues, but I know for my husband, it was very difficult as he saw himself unable to do more and more of the things that he always was the one taking care of. Yeah. And so he had a high level of frustration, and we had to figure out how to balance that, because he was obviously frustrated, and it would definitely come out on me. And so, and I'm trying to remain upbeat, but there were times where, I would often go into the garage, climb into the car, close the car door, and then scream. Yeah. Get it out of my system, get back, because I didn't figure he could hear me out there. And then I'd come back into the house and there we go. Now, because it's hard. It's hard. Caregiving, despite the fact I would never change it. I'm glad that I did it. I would do it again. It's not an easy endeavor. Right. No. Absolutely. Yeah. So you've kind of mentioned a little how your family feels about the book. Overall, let's talk a little more about that. How do people who knew your mother, who knew the situation from some angle, how are they feeling about what they read?
Well, the siblings overall have been very good. I mean, I knew there were a couple incidents. You read the book. There's a couple of things about, especially one of my brothers, and I waited. I waited to put it at the end of the book. So I painted hopefully a more positive picture about everybody. But this was an incident that was very important to the relationship between he and my mother and me. And it made me assume more of the role of a protector for my mother. And that was when we were teenagers. So that was very important. He didn't say anything directly, but I've heard from another sibling about that. Overall, they all wrote beautiful reviews. Good. And what was really fun, last night I did a virtual author visit with the public library in the town that I grew up in New Jersey. And I don't know, there were about 30 people on the call. And so I didn't know exactly who was there. but two of the people on there lived on my street.
Oh, how fun.
And one was was babysat by my younger sister. And I had been in touch with her on Facebook, because we have a lot of people, especially from my hometown, on Facebook following once they heard about this book. They've been super as far as support. And the other one was a next door neighbor they were a lovely couple and really good for my parents. And in fact, the husband is mentioned in the book, the one that was peering through my mom's window with me. So that was very funny. But she wrote me an email after and said, I couldn't be seen and I didn't want to be heard because I was crying the entire time because I loved your family so much and I love our street. And so that was really special. But a lot of people, I guess, first heard about it, and I've been promoting it like crazy for a couple of years now. So some people are fed up, I think, with it, but most have been very supportive, and they knew my parents. A lot of people will say, "Oh, say hi to David, say hi to Carol." I'm now the conduit between Facebook and the book and old friends that I hadn't been in touch with for probably about 50 years or, once I left for college, I never really went back there. Right. And so that's really special because it's bringing family and friends back together again and back in touch. So that was certainly unintended, but certainly a wonderful thing that's come out of the book.
You mentioned a little earlier that there was a point in time where your mother couldn't remember your name. And you had an ingenious way of handling that. You want to tell people what that was?
Well, duct tape. Duct taped her and until she got it right. Well, it was early
not
on.
The case.
It was probably a few months in. So at this point, I'm doing everything, and there were no lines that I did not cross, and including wiping her butt a few times a day, and. So one morning I went, and she had a funny sense of humor and sometimes wicked. And so I wasn't sure if she was kidding or not, but I went in one morning, always woke her up with some juice. And she said, "Now, what is it I call you?" And I said, "You're kidding, right?" And she says, "No." And I said, "Name your children." She said, "Laurel, Michael, Carol, David, Deesey." I said, And she was stumped. And I said, "Mark." And she goes, "Oh, Mark." So I thought I was good. And then she goes, "Mark with a K?" I go, "Yeah, Mark with a K. You named me. I'm your favorite son." She goes, "I don't have favorites." I said under my breath, you have a favorite to forget. Yeah. And so instead of getting mad, which I could have taken it personally. So, and this was, I guess, some of my design background. I printed my name in big block letters and taped it to the ceiling. So I gave her a visual aid, and in the morning, she's usually, looking in the ceiling was easy. So I would go in and say, "Good morning." And she'd say, "Good morning." And then her eyes would shoot to the ceiling for the visual aid and come back and go, "Mark." So she was very proud. So after a few weeks, she didn't need that anymore, but it was pretty funny. So I have a chapter in the book asking the question, does wiping butt cause amnesia? Yeah. And I think I have proof that in fact does.
That it may in fact do that. Isn't that interesting? Like I said, I think that's the other reason I really enjoyed the book was there's this inventiveness. It's like, okay, we've run into this stumbling block. Now what do we do? We've run into this stumbling block. What do we do? I also really enjoyed, there was a part in there where you kind of were going against what some authorities were suggesting. There was a time where they suggested your mother not be fed any more food because, she was essentially actively dying and there was no need for it. There was another point where you got her up and got her moving again. Yeah. Despite the fact that she had, and I loved seeing that you were very proactive and you looked at your mother and you said, "Now, wait a minute. I know what someone else is telling me, but I know what I see." Yeah.
And she was game. She was, again, a tough cookie, and she was willing. If she wasn't willing, that would be different. Or if she really put let's say, her foot down, if she could, she may have done that. But I said, "Listen, let's get up and let's get walking again." And she said, "Let's do it." And it took some effort, certainly a lot of effort on her part, but she was a trooper. it was lovely to see that. And then also I wanted to keep her active, not only physically, but also keeps her mind active. And,
Exactly.
And so she helped me fold laundry, and we played cards and even Angry Birds on the iPad. And she was cheating at cards quite a bit as well. And so, things were good if she starts cheating. But it didn't have any, felt no guilt whatsoever. She was just lifting up those cards, peeking at them before choosing which ones she wanted. So part of that was my fault, because I introduced her to red wine, which may not have also been on the hospice menu, but she seemed to like it, and so that led her down a dangerous path, I think.
A dangerous path of cards and cheating, and it could have been gambling if you'd let her out of the house, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
So I know that the book has won several awards, and I just want to know, as the author of this book, about you and your mom and this journey, how does it feel to get an award that says, hey, we love what you wrote?
Well, that's it. I have to say it's pretty cool. I mean, I wrote a lot of stuff, let's say, in Hollywood screenplays, and none were produced, and the short film that was produced, and I wrote a lot of jokes and things like that. But this was my first book. And I knew I had, let's say, a unique voice, or at least it's my voice.
Right.
And my dad was pretty clever with words, and my mom was a proofreader for the largest newspaper in New Jersey. So, but it's interesting. I cannot tell you a book I read in high school. And now I'm an award-winning writer. It's hysterical, or not so hysterical, because when I did this event yesterday was at the public library. The first thing I asked was, did I have any outstanding library fees? There was an issue way back when I was like 12. So maybe that. Anyway, yes, it's very nice. I mean, you put your heart and soul into something, and you hope it resonates with people. And then when the critics get a hold of it and say, yeah, this is good, that's lovely. But the most important part of the personal notes that I've received from people on Facebook, and even some of the reviews on Amazon, have just been really humbling and lovely. And those are the things that are even more important, I think.
I have to agree. You did allude to the fact that you're writing again. So let's talk a little bit about what's next.
Well, the last draft I turned into the publisher. I cut about 4,000 words out because I said, this is more appropriate for another book. And so when this thing happened with my mom, 14 years earlier, my dad died, but I only had 8 days with my dad. And so I flew in from LA. Again, we got one of these calls, doctor says dad's got 30 days. So you fly in the next morning, and then it ended up only being a week. And so I kept notes just, from my writing, just as a habit. So I wrote a lot of notes, and I always intended to do something with that. But also I've always recorded family history in one way or another. And so I did a documentary of this trip that I took my dad to Italy on. And I shot, or I would write poems to summarize our summer vacations with the family, just to make a record of the highlights and things like that. And then I started this whole thing with memory books with all family members. And those are really special gifts and fun projects. And they started off just being my memories, and then it became group projects because I invited everybody in, and they were lovely. And now it's funny that all my siblings, as they hit 70 years old, I give them a personal digital book of my 70 memories of them. And so those are pretty cool. I just sent my brother one a few days ago. So he's 70. I'm done with this, I think, with the memory book.
Is that it?
My memory goes. So out of those 4,000 words, a lot of those words were more appropriate for a book about my dad. And so I had probably 3 books in mind, because I had those 8 days with my dad. So that was going to be a book. I wrote a screenplay and had the documentary of the trip to Italy, but I always thought, maybe a book.
Maybe a book out of that, right?
Deeper into that trip would be good. And then my Father invented a thing he called Nutrinuts.
Yep.
So this half popcorn snack was just fantastic. And so, and I started the project before my dad passed, but he passed before we actually got to the marketplace. And my brother and I built this into a national brand called Grandpa Poe's Originals, which was very cool. And we did that to honor my father. And so there's at least a book in that whole process, because that was just a crazy time. And last night I had a nightmare about it again. Because we just sold the factory. I built a factory in LA, and we sold the factory a couple of years ago, but I still have nightmares about, now we got this big company finally interested. We got to start it all over again. The equipment's been sold, the factory's been sold, so it's like the nightmare. So that's the other story. But here's the funny thing about it. So you have those 3 events, could be 3 separate books. But when I took my dad to Italy, it's a little village. It's less than 100 people now, but it was around 200 when we got there. And his grandfather was the mayor of this village at one point. And there was some rumor and controversy about why he went to the United States.
Left, right.
And that we'll go certainly more into depth in this book. But while we're walking around the street, we found this one gentleman, one of the few that spoke any English. And as we're walking around the streets, I saw on the side of the road on a burlap sheet popcorn kernels drying in the sun. And I asked Paulo, what's that about? And he says, it's a popcorn. We grow the popcorn. And I said, oh my God. And I brought a sample of my dad's snack with me, not knowing I wanted to share it with this village, but not knowing this was the opportunity. So I told Paulo what's going on. And so these things do not look like popcorn. They're little golden nuggets. So I told Paulo, this is an invention of my dad, and it's called Nutrinuts, and it's made out of popcorn. And Paulo looks at it and says, I said, not a good popcorn. I said, no, I know. They're supposed to be like that. They're very good. Try them. They're very crunchy. And so he had this idea in his head, this is not good. He put a piece in his mouth and did not like it. He said, not a good popcorn. Not a good popcorn. So I said, if we ever export this to Italy, that will be the name of the product. It's not a good popcorn. Anyway, so I turned to Dad and said, Dad, this is why you invented this. It's in your blood.
Yeah.
So that's the, not to ruin the ending, but that's the ending of the book, where all 3 stories came together.
I love that. I love that idea. So, hey guys, if you want to continue this conversation, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook. There you're going to have an opportunity to win not 1, but 2 copies, because Mark has offered to give a digital copy of the book as well as an audio copy. So head on over today. Tell me something you liked or loved about this podcast, and you may be a winner. So tell me, if someone wanted to chat with you a little bit more about what you're doing now, about being a caregiver, about, I don't know, the popcorn treats, how do they get up with you?
Well, if they Google a cup of tea on the Commode, we're everywhere. So that's the website address, cup of tea on the Commode.org. A cup of tea on the Commode at Gmail is my email. We have a YouTube channel with a lot of funny videos, probably 170 promo videos that I've done, and those are like a minute or less, and you'll get a good sense of my mom's humor through those. Also on the website, I have a section called bonus materials that I added not too long ago, which has some of the poems and some of the memory books, and the documentary of the Italy trip is there, and then some of the other things that we that I describe in the book, I put in that section, which is kind of fun, I think, if they're looking and go, I wonder what those carvings look like, and what about that Italy trip? It's all there. So I'm easy to reach, and if they want to keep up to date on the news for a cup of tea on the Commode, sign up on the website, because then I have a blog, but I also promote stuff probably a couple times a week, because there's always neat things happening, like an interview with Terry and stuff like that. So these are big events, and I love it, because anytime I can share this story, it keeps my mom in the present. And so that's
Absolutely.
everybody's gift to me, and that's very much appreciated.
Wonderful. So everybody, all the links will be in the show notes. Head right out, grab this book. It's really a good one. Definitely has a lot of humor to it. It's also very touching. And anyone who's a caregiver or believes they ever will be one, I think it's also really informational. It'll give you a lot of good tips of things that you may want to consider as you go through this particular kind of journey. Thank you so much for being with me today, Mark. I really appreciated it.
It was my pleasure, and thank you.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.